Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, men and women, nonconformers and non-believers, gender X and gender equals, lesbian, gay, straight, bisexual, transsexual, pansexual, gender fluid, queer, anything and everything in between. Welcome to Eat the Storms. Today's show is a celebration of everything Pride. My name is Delphine B. Donnelly, a gay poet, and today we have a host of victorious voices from the LGBTQ plus community who are going to share poems penned along their journeys. We are jam-packed today with talent, and I am so proud that these voices have agreed to join me here. No journey is easy. No voice comes naturally. We are told how to eat, answer, hold, thought, how to walk, but how to express who it is that we are, how to explain how comfortable or uncomfortable we are within our skins, how to confess to loving him, her, them, they. These are still not lessons we are teaching enough. I grew up in Dublin in the 90s and truly felt like the only gay in the village, but the truth was I wasn't. There were plenty of other boys and girls like me, frightened, bullied, beaten, battening down their hatches before they'd even felt what it was like to walk in the open air. Journeys take time. Accepting who we can be takes years, and that's even before we've asked you to understand who we are. Because we don't really need acceptance from other people. What we really need is to be taught how to accept ourselves for who we are. From other people, all we need is respect. Welcome to the first Eat the Storms Pride Poetry Podcast. I'm going to start off today's show by reading 3 poems that are a reflection on my childhood. I guess I had a strange relationship with school because I loved it. I loved learning, loved trying to figure out what it was that I was going to be. Possibly because it was easier than figuring out who it was that I was going to be at that age. But I also hated it because every day I went to school I was bullied, beaten, spat upon. Told that I was a girl, that I was gay, even before anyone understood what that word meant. It took me a long time to figure out who I was, but it did not help that the school system offered no support whatsoever. We often say that kids look at the world and they themselves think they are the most important people in it. When I was a kid, I never felt like I was the only person in the world. I just felt like I was the only person in the world who wasn't allowed to take part in it. This poem is called Patent Leather Points of Pressure. Navy jumper, twice monthly washed. Blue shirt and tie sliced with a red thread. Grey trousers getting tighter and growing shorter. I was 15. In patent leather shoes with points to pierce the playground's pricks. Sweaty under pit and after-school spit. Fearless in faces of fools, the types the teachers cheered for. Footballers fit for nought but the field and then curse later with no flair in the chair of their classes. Those were the days of the ripe red walls and stained floors I'd stripped one summer. Looking for a tangible form in the simple wood buried under a complicated carpet of mixed messages. Knuckle-knotted boards that twisted under cover, like my fear, those feelings, my faults. Knowing that liberty did not live in or under things that were beaten daily into their place. And so you hide. In patent leather shoes that never lift high enough off the ground to make an impression in the guts of those pricks. Those days when education insisted, with its uniforms and rulers to measure the distances of growing hairs from strangling collars, that similarity was the best way to integrate. 30 not-so-neat navy jumpers, pulls, stretched, stenched, and some stained with that after-school spit. With 30 ties tied in tight knots around necks, licked by the sweat of the sport in place of a single shot at the goalpost of individuality. Those were the days when I turned that cumbersome carpet over in a screaming sealed shut bedroom with its rickety red walls, trying to carve out a sliver of liberty, fraternity, equality that I had mistakenly believed should have been cardinal in a classroom run by compassionate, copper-collecting Catholics. This poem is called Calling. Boys came calling after school, sometime between 6 and 8, before the summer. Longer days under the swell of frustration. Boys came calling after school, halting homework and hunting, looking to come closer to a truth, but I held mine firm in the door, halfway, me half in, half confused as to what they wanted, intrigued as to who they thought I was. Boys came calling after school, before the summer. Longer days, stifling nights, sticky like glue, like adhesive that never stuck to the right surfaces, as I beat myself into a form I'd never fit. I wanted to open the door to the boys who came calling, to accept that some could be sincere after so much shame. But I was afraid at the time of who exactly might come out. This poem is called The Sting of Conditioning. For every push, for every jibe, for every spit upon my childhood, my conditioning, my inability to conform, I kept walking onwards, believing I was better, never being allowed to acknowledge how I'd been broken, how I'd carry those bullies like bites to forever sting beneath the skin. And now it's time for our very first guest. Introductions today are shorter than usual to make sure there's enough time given over to every guest. Check out www.eatthestorms.com in the podcast section for details on where to find each guest, to like, follow and even buy their collections. This first guest was born in London and is the creator and host of Poetry LGBT. Her debut collection is just out and entitled Charred, a survivor speaks her truth to inspire. Please give it up for Andreena Leeanne.
Thank you, Damien, for inviting me to read a few poems on your fantastic podcast for this special Pride edition. Today I'm going to read a few poems from my debut collection. It's called Charred, a survivor speaks her truth to inspire. And yeah, it's 6 years worth of work, really. I found poetry in February 2014 when my partner Jermaine got me into it. She's very much into writing, creativity and poetry. And she suggested that it would be useful for me to write down, how I feel, to journal and things like that. So I started poetry and I haven't looked back. So I'm going to firstly read what it says at the back, and it's also repeated at the front in the foreword. It basically sums up my book, really. There is a strong correlation between childhood trauma and mental health issues. I suffer with PTSD and depression and use poetry to write honestly about the multitude of issues I have experienced in my 39 years. I have found writing to be hugely therapeutic. While I recognise the value of professional therapy, my poetry has helped me to come to terms with some of these issues. If they're not already doing so, I hope to inspire the readers of this book to speak and write their truth. We don't have to be qualified writers to write down how we feel. Honesty is the only qualification for this kind of work, and we don't have to share it unless we want to. This collection is called Charred. Think of a piece of wood that has been exposed to the flames. You may think of it as damaged, and it's true, it has been burnt and blackened, but it is still resilient and much stronger after going through this process. Think of me as a piece of charred wood. So that's the poem. Well, that's not the poem. That's what it says at the back and in the foreword. So right now I'm going to read 2 poems from this collection, and they're both about, well, you'll see what they're about. You'll hear what they're about. This one's called I Am Free. I spent my teenage years listening to lyrics like Buju Banton's Boom Bye Bye in a batty boy head. What he's saying is gay people should be shot in the head. Imagine that. Those lyrics were heard by millions. In those days, it never made me angry. In fact, I used to dance to it. I could name a few more. T.O.K., Elephant Man, Vibes Cartel. In the 90s, those tunes dominated the dance floor within my bedroom walls. In 1999, I married a man. Was I in denial? Threesome anyone? Yes, me, him and she. I came out as a lesbian in 2003. Looking back, all the clues were there, it's just me that couldn't see. People knew I was gay before me. It must have been the way I looked at my friend's auntie, or the way I dressed and rebelled by shaving my head, or maybe because I rode a moped. The truth is, I chose not to see. I was too afraid to be true to me. People were too judgmental back then. I cared way too much about what people thought and said. I met a girl who took me to a gay club. Those homophobic tunes were played by gay DJs in those gay clubs. What a head fuck. People I knew said they liked the beat and ignored the lyrics. I'm not exactly sure when or why something changed, but there was uproar. Buju and other bashment artists were banned. Us gays had taken a stand. Out with that shit. It was no longer acceptable to listen to it. I no longer had to listen to it. They say I'm an activist. It's been a process, all part of the journey. I am free to finally be who I'm meant to be, loving this reality within the LGBTQ plus community. My dysfunctional and disjointed family may not be proud of me, but I'm able to maintain my sanity and not let them get the better of me mentally. I'm going to take a bow because I'm happy now. I am free. The next poem is called Proud with Pride. Be proud and stand your ground. Walk around and make your sound. Wear your colours and stand out for hours. Wave the various flags. Try not to worry. Find your tribe. You're in good company. Shelter from the hate. Fight with all your might for what is your human right. They will see. It's all love and light. In time, we will all be all right. Love who we love. Marry who we marry. Don't apologise. No need to ever be sorry. We are who we are. Just live and be happy. Thank you. I've been Andreena Leeanne. You can find me on Instagram at survivor.andreena.leeanne. Also follow Poetry LGBT at Poetry LGBT on all the socials. Thank you so much for listening.
This poem is called Learning to Climb Walls and documents that first true attraction to a student who was staying across the road from us when I was about 15, and things were suddenly so close and yet so very far away. Learning to climb walls. There can be earthquakes in little towns, far from tectonic plates, on little streets rarely shaken, where we sat once on the wall of a garden now obsolete, the summer burning through our coollessness as we trembled beneath attractions we didn't have the words to understand, while eyes watched from windows, trying to translate thoughts tossed between their local boy and a sandy-haired student of exchange. And I wanted to exchange, to uncover all that was growing curious. We sat on this wall once, in the kiss of youth's sunlight, in the stifling days of undulating adolescence and the growing tension beneath every question, and that temptation. And I wanted nothing more than to touch that temptation, despite our twisted tongues and those eyes always watching, always wondering what was unfolding between us. Two boys just beginning to join the colours that make blue for a while, beneath the weight and the worth of all the nothingness that never trembled for longer than a month in the summer, when our legs occasionally touched like tectonic plates, shifting positions beneath all that was once solid, sensations rubbing up against all that we wanted, and what I suppose we knew at the time we could never really have. There can be earthquakes in little towns. Our next guest is from Cardiff in Wales and released his debut collection earlier this year, published by Animal Heart Press. It is a stunning poetic guide to survival called Spectrum of Flight. Please welcome to the show, David Hanlon.
Hello, my name is David Hanlon and I'm going to be reading a few poems from my debut collection, Spectrum of Flight. I'd just like to say a big thank you to Damien for inviting me to read on his podcast, Eat the Storms. And yeah, this book, is a lot about overcoming hardship and finding oneself. And it's a lot to do with identity and coming to terms with my sexual identity. So, I think it's fitting to be reading these poems on the Pride episode. This is called Swimming Lessons. They say I am gay, taunt and bully me. They think they know the damage. They don't. What is this word I do not know? I know more words than them, but this one is out of reach. Still, the decision has been made. It is me, It is bad. I am bad. When I learn what it is, come to realize for myself that I am it, I think, how could they have known this about me before I did? Why am I this bad thing? I try to hide it. I can't. I was thrown into the river behind that schoolyard and spent years swimming against the current. At last I made it upstream, a gay man, bathing, floating, wondering what they would say now if I told them how lucky I feel that I became a strong swimmer. The second poem I'm going to read from my collection is called My Voice Was Too Feminine, and this poem was written after a poem by Eric Klein called Years. Here it is. My voice was too feminine, and this, like my mannerisms, directly affected how much bullying I received. I remember being a teenager in that sportswear store with my younger brother, too scared to ask the sporty, manly assistant for the Adidas cap I wanted on the top shelf behind the counter. I remember begging my brother to ask for me, too self-conscious of my own feminine voice being heard in a hypermasculine environment. I wonder how many other times I have felt silenced in this way. I imagine the percentage is quite high, as well as it is for times I have been called fucking queer for holding hands with a boyfriend, or perhaps even higher, as it is for times I have had the opportunity to hold hands with a boyfriend, and have not done so because of fearing said abuse. Well, this is me seizing all those missed opportunities, holding all those boyfriends' unheld hands. This is me, gay boy, batty boy David, holding all your hands. So those two poems, I'll just say a little bit about both. Swimming lessons really is about being called gay before I knew what being gay was, being bullied for that, and learning that it was bad, before learning what it even was, and really how that damaged my sense of self and made it that much more difficult to gain acceptance around that part of my identity. And with My Voice Was Too Feminine, I use a lot of the name calls in the poems, fucking queer, batty boy. These were name calls that really silenced me. And I think, my collection is a lot about sort of reclaiming my own voice. So I try to use these words, and each time I speak them, it's sort of trying to break down that fear, not being afraid to say them. The word batty boy, I never really knew what it was. I knew where it came from. When we were younger, we used to watch, a popular film was Ali G, which was Sacha Baron Cohen. And he used to use that, in the films, in a comedic sense. But, it's only as an adult I've learned the origin of the term batty boy. And it comes from Jamaican. It's used a lot in the dancehall culture in Jamaica, and in chart music there's lyrics such as "burn batty boys," things like "shoot them in the head." So it's really, there's such a strong meaning attached to the name of hate, and when we were teenagers, the boys calling me this name, none of us really ever knew that. I find that quite interesting. So yeah, and the last poem I'm going to read is called On Seeing Derek Jarman's Sebastian When Coming of Age. The corridors, the classrooms, crawl space vents, house on top, boys' roars, a coliseum crushing down on me, one by one, each one louder than the next. Batty boy, batty boy, batty boy, batty boy. The louder the name call, the one that could break silence, swift, powerful as a punch from a boxer who knocks out his opponent with one hit, the more maniacal the ensuing howls of laughter. And that one boy, whomever he may be that day, usually lower in rank, who achieved this great feat, would be shoulder nudged, would receive arms like hammers swung around his neck, momentary alpha status. I duck behind computers, cling to handrails, hide on unpopular staircases, live in the suffocation, gesticulating body, effeminate demeanour, high-pitched inflection. My teenage years spent beating away an unyielding boomerang. At home, I came across a blank video cassette, Sebastian. To this day, I don't know how I stumbled on such a film in my family home, but I do know that etched on my battered adolescent mind was the chisel of defined muscle, laid up against jagged rocks, softened into tender-made beds where any head such as mine, scrambled as a Pollock painting, would be cushioned, calm as windless seas, comforted as one is by the sight of new life in spring. Each touch, each fondle, liquid yolk centres flowing into one another, the nourishing, one taking the other's hand and leading, delicate as dandelion seed heads dispersed by a light wind, to water's carnal grip. The film held my hand like a parent holds the small child's at the seaside, as they take their first steps into vast, unknown waters. Today, I dive head first into sea stacks, splay my body over arrow-sharp cliffs. Thank you very much. And that's the final poem that I'll share. And just a little bit on that one is Sebastian, which is a film by Derek Jarman, was a film that, I saw, I found in my family home. It'd been taped off the TV, and, it showed these very intimate, up-close images of men embracing each other, and that intimacy, and the way it's shot and everything, it's almost like a celebration of their love, of their sexuality and their embrace. And it's in slow motion. It's very celebratory, and for me, it really stuck with me, that image, or that scene, because living in a council estate, being bullied every day for being gay was really gave me such a negative view of what it meant to be gay, and to see this celebratory depiction, it was nothing I'd seen before, and it showed me that it could be something to celebrate, and that it wasn't a bad thing. So those are the 3 poems I'll leave you with, and if thank you very much for listening. And if anyone is interested in checking out my collection, once again, it's called Spectrum of Flight, and you can find out more at Animal Heart Press. Thanks again.
These next poems bring me back to Paris and recall two people who shared the journey for a time. They are memorial songs, if you will, for names that no longer belong to either of us. Two people who shared their story for a while. Seasons out of sorts, who sat once and enjoyed the bloom under the fall. This poem is called The Furniture Makers. We built things, like shower rails and kitchen lights, Cato dishes that died in the oven, theories on converting Korea into forever and not just a 3-week diversion from dysphoria. Kisses. We built kisses out of thin air and laughter. Laughter we built as if it was all we needed to feed our day. I was the funny one and you laughed at times like you'd never laughed before. Sometimes we built bridges to cross divides we didn't always understand. Sometimes we built boats but forgot the oars. Sometimes we built temporary positions around sofas and shallow shows to balance the shit we didn't have the correct tools to deal with. Once, we built a language to lock ourselves into, while on the outside, where it could be cold and cutting and callous. Sometimes we built walls for others to climb over. Sometimes we like to test the other, to tease, to taunt, to attract, to test the recoil of an elastic. We build things. We built things, like shower rails and silly meals and signs and languages and kisses to complete, and sometimes we built walls, though in the end, one was too high to get back over. This poem is called Some People That We Used to Be. We sit now and sip cocktails. The waiter pulls out your chair and hands me the menu after calling you Madame. I strain now to hear your voice, softer, gentler, feminine finding freedom. I catch you checking your lipstick in the mirror, pulling a curl back into place above those blushed cheekbones still a little swollen. A normal evening in August in Paris, sipping gins and rums and telling tales before swapping tables in Korean restaurants that give us a brief taste of who we used to be. We sit here over cocktails, the man and the madame, looking like a couple in the reflection of a tainted mirror. And I wonder if anyone can tell, as you smooth out your skirt, that you used to be my boyfriend. This poem is called The Wrong Skin. Water turns on the tide. Roots find ways through the rubble. Nature is adaptable. But body is bound to bone. Movement moulded to our muscle, and the shadow cannot be deceived. and so you itch. You claw at this fleshed reflection in front of you and see in its false the fraud of its form. Nature is nurtured by adoption, not blood tests or mind games. Nature does not wait, is not answerable to anyone. Skin softer than before. You paint yourself into a portrait, waiting to be a person, wanting to be seen, not sneered, no longer sad. Shapes shift in clouds crossing, in rivers winding, in the bloom breaking into beauty. But the skin restricts and these angles arch out as obtrusive. Masculine is the mould now marked like measles that no cream can quickly cure. And there is an itch. I know you want to pull a finer form from this flesh that no longer fits to your feeling. The air too stale within this shape for it to be much longer sustainable. Nature is easily adaptable, but you too will find your way into beauty before this summer is up. Our next guest is joining us today from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in the Catskills in New York. He is currently the featured poet in the Silver Branch series at Blackborough Poetry, and it's time for you to find out why. Please raise the roof for Ryan Norman.
Thank you, Damien, for inviting me to Eat the Storms. My name is Ryan Norman, and I'm an American poet. Much of my poetry is confessional in nature while taking inspiration from the beautiful landscape that surrounds me here in the Hudson Valley of New York. I'll be sharing 3 of my poems today that trace the course of a relationship. The first, Crashing, is quite idyllic and captures that idea of summer love. Crashing. It was a foot race down the yellowing path, sunburnt grass. A downtrodden history marked the center lane between overgrown forsythia, buttermelt in the heat to its ravaged leaves, aphid love bites. We howled past the weather-worn shed, whitewashed flakes splintered to the weed-brimmed window box. A shoe flew by, and then another, until anyone could find us by following the clothing trail, down to the creek bed where we dove into the barely known of one another, drinking with our eyes an unquenchable thirst in side glances. We steamed lava hot in the icy water. I watched you float as a waterfall crashed harder than I did for you. This second poem is more ominous and dark, and its observation creates space in the relationship. Soothsayer. I watched you there, underneath dawn's golden drip, wondering how you didn't drown in your sleep as the light flooded in. First across your eyes, a rich mask depuffing the bloat of last night's consumption, then leaking down your nose past your mouth. I watched the sun's heavy hand grasp your throat, yet you went on sleeping in our tiny tent and didn't so much as come up for air. And I was drowning again, at your feet, the 6 a.m. dew dripping on my forehead. It was best to let you sleep. I would come to find out some months later. Count your breaths, settle into them like they were my own. A belly rises in rhythm for a count of 7. Lucky for me, I learned. But your family said I soothed you, so a belly can sink for a count of 5. Without the soothing, you spat burning coals at our feet, and I wasn't relieved to know it wasn't just me on fire. You taught me to roll until the flames died, and they did. But I could no longer soothe myself while you burned in the sun. It's nights like those, where we swallowed the burn until the stars fell on top of us, where your naked ambitions eroded under rivers' wet carvings, blank marble chiseled into blank flesh. The whooping cheers and whistles silent under rivers' roar. And I read the moon's full face, just a soothsayer for a night. And I swiped my reflection in the water, knowing how fraudulent that grin would be in golden light. Finally, through transmutation, 2 insects once in love separate. Cicada song. Slumbering in underground cradles, dirt nymphs, dreaming of Athenian ancestors' gilded bodies, pinning ancient tendrilled locks. Birthed from the soil, autochthonous to apple carcass sediment, eager to shed our youthful shells, we dried in the sun beside your glistening likeness, stamped on silver thrown at your feet. My new skin hardening over time, watching sunsets alone in the boughs we claimed together. With your song, choose me, choose me. To watch you fly off, as I lay among the misted orchard with wet wings, and receive a message in the wind. You're singing for someone new.
Our next guest poet is joining us loud and proud from the other side of Ireland in County Mayo and is the author of The Woman with the Owl Tattoo and the recent recipient of the Terence McAnally Bursary for her LGBTQ themed play. Stand up and cheer for Anne Walsh Donnelly.
Hello there. My name is Anne Walsh Donnelly. I'm delighted to be here today to read a few poems on Damien Donnelly's podcast, Damien is No Relation. I'm going to read 2 poems. The first one I'm going to read is from my chapbook called The Woman with an Owl Tattoo. The chapbook is a poetic memoir of my journey since the ending of my marriage to discovering my sexuality and then coming out as being gay in midlife. And this first poem is called Manana Heron, and it's a call to the women of Ireland to try making love with a woman if they haven't, and I'm extolling the joys of making love with a woman in the poem. Manana Heron. To die not having known the frenzy of making love with a woman is to live without ever jumping over the bar of your crib? How could you not want to watch a woman fling her underwear on your bedroom floor, present you with soft skin for your nails and teeth to score like blades on dough? How could you not want to feel your edges slip into her hollows like a spoon folding flour into cake batter? How could you not want to hear her whimper crescendo to a jungle roar while your fingers move inside her? How could you not want a denouement to your play, when secret stories leak onto ivory sheets, then tease tongues and start the sequel? How could you not want to drag a woman to bed at 7 on a Saturday evening, rise at 2 on Sunday afternoon, sleep deprived and smelling like a marathon runner? Race outside to tackle weedy flower beds, gleeful that soil will not rest in your clipped fingernails. The second poem I want to read is my attempt at being humorous, taking a humorous look at the menopause, which I am currently going through. And this is all about my vagina. My menopausal vagina is the village's oldest pub, doors wide open. She ignores medical experts who call closing time. She doesn't miss sex hormones that disappeared with dusk. In fact, she's still quite a capable host, and her parties never run dry. She doesn't feel like a forgotten World War I trench full of sludge. Prefers to think of herself as an estuary. Kayakers, windsurfers, and paddlers still want to explore. She delights in their enjoyment of her brackish water that always leaves a salty taste on the tongue. My vagina is not a posy that will welcome a man's rose. She's ragweed, not easy to contain, liable to poison mules and asses, stupid enough to wander into her pastures for a munch, ignoring the women-only sign she's erected at her entrance. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Our next guest was born in Calgary in Canada but now lives in Amsterdam, where she teaches literature and writing at the University of Amsterdam. Please welcome to the podcast Erin Russell.
Hi, my name is Erin Russell. I'm a poet from Canada living in Amsterdam. I was utterly thrilled when Damien asked me to be part of today's podcast. Thrilled to be part of the launch of his gorgeous new collection, and really, really appreciative to be part of this community today celebrating Pride. To that end, I want to start with a few poems published in a bundle of 3 on Empty Mirror. The first one, and indeed the third one, are about sort of my understanding growing up gay in a very fundamentalist Christian community where it was very much evil to have a different orientation, and having moved to this country where I found much acceptance, and yet moving sort of outside of the so-called Randstad, the 3 major cities, there's still a lot of perhaps more fundamentalist communities who do still judge, who might condemn homosexuals. And this first poem is actually about an incident where that occurred. My ex and I, we went up north to the highest most point of the Via de Santiago. I'd been wanting to start that pilgrimage route and do a kind of poetic meditation. I'd brought with me Christina Rossetti's unpublished meditation on the Book of Revelation called The Face of the Deep. It's an utterly stunning work. Really pure genius of philosophy and theology. And I was wrestling with that text, and then we were going to do this walk that millions of people have done over hundreds of years. And my girlfriend and I were kissing in the tiny seaside town on the sea. It was quite beautiful, on a pier. When a woman and her children came out of their house and started yelling at us and telling us we were evil. So I wrote this poem, and because Rossetti was on my mind, it's got much Rossetti shot through. There's a few sort of notes about this. One, my partner at the time had alopecia, and so there's some references to eyelashes and eyebrows, the note being that they can be lost at different times than perhaps the hair on the head. And then I've already mentioned the note about Netherlands being one of the most accepting countries in the world, but that there's these pockets outside of the major cities where reports of harassment have actually been on the rise. Harlingen disassembled. The way their mother said values and blonde kids scowled, they were suspicious behind thatched eyes. Our kiss on the pier, traveling north of Amsterdam, out of the city, a journey, pilgrim, to stand at the edge of an everything, a way of being that lied and lied. The way you saw from their eyes, a behind furrows seen, perennial, certain, waters out a small Dutch window. The way we entered their frame, something to widen a reference, my remembrance. We were told to save their souls. They are soul-saving children. How little I knew of my own nature. The way we had gathered more of your lashes one by one, only that morning they were almost all fallen out by then. The way my nerve endings were all grown back. Our losses and gains non-binary, that is to say, points on the continuum, situated, counted, correct. Such cannot be our honest theory unless it is also our practice, an exploding pink firework graphic, a flashing rainbow heart. You came to the rescue, in your own make-small-of-it way, your more kisses and academic distance, and I was content to class myself with the hearers. The clearer the sense I got of the shape and proportions of the huge shadow that must, after all, hang over us. You opting to go on with the smiling. And always it is you, in your own small way, dove-belly arms that hold. At the end of years, we are still repeating this shortly. If we receive the witness of men, the witness of God is greater, whether or not in the gaze of men, gods. And you, smiling your anxious smile, such cannot be our honest theory, unless it be likewise our practice. Proactive, a certain kind of doing, an application of form. You there with your pineapple and melon bags for the overnight, expensive eyebrow brushes and no eyebrows. The light cut across high cheeks, you smiled and smiled, but I saw it flash, saw blue eyes deep and dark at brackish windows, at a long Dutch window. We may not connect so human a virtue as patience with the blessed angels, because exemption from sin seems to entail incapacity for certain graces. It was night. I was angry. The second poem is Joe's Loyalty. Like mastodons folding slick seed wide wings across the winter-cut meridian plain, the slack yellow blades, the ergot raised green. We came of age in corridor clinics, all those tongues of flame. The last dove perching only a minute now before it tears off what it can in teeth. The way ruin begins with a moon, a month. I'm just trying to be super. Is it showing? The signs of ablation, like so many eruptions, heaping freshwater silt, waving, seismic favel, the oscillating bracken swell. But you performed the topographies of place with care, were always correct. The fragile fin still lodging itself in my throat. What could it be to the gods who came before? The sun losing karmic ground. A spice sea carnation holding fast, he was first to fell the fist-slipped stalactite, twin figures in an unquiet cave. And you, with your hemlock fresh cut and thinking to try this distemper. Our mother was beautiful, though, was she not, in those days, the leaves up to her mandrake throat. Pledge. You put down your plath, point portent fingers at the cracking devastation screen, squatting demigod with pomegranate head on fire, your left hemisphere ready to collapse on itself. Trauma bonds person thing. I think maybe you shouldn't watch the news. Attention sinking, remarks the man doctor. The bell tower might yet be saved, a commentator. This is the greatest spectacle in the world. You/folks come off simple when you/they get excited. Distance is relative, nuclear, murder. You consider getting in the car. You have navigation. Texts are coming in. 5 hours, you write. I've read a lot of the classic stuff, they reply. Bukowski, you ask. The smell, a Chinook and hot wind, but continental. An orientation, an embodiment, embalmment. You/we feel it on the skin. As all things, all the things. Practicing normal by following its scripts in our choice of lovers, forms. Judging thingness by its situation, an inscription. These gaps between text and body, there are whole worlds. And you thought the discomfort was somatic, was all in your head. The crypt, hive, offering box spire, all the while incinerating like dried juniper. Patterns are hard to break. Things accumulate. There's protest. Remember when you were the apostate loved by everyone? Desire being hard to pin down, geographically, ontologically, in theory. A gazillionaire pledges money for reconstruction. You'd think I meant wealth, as in money, security, power, esteem, but things, really, I just mean things. Habitual, just another word for you'll accept it all. This poem is called Sediment at Milk River, and as I look out across the Dutch terrain here, I'm always drawn back to this particularly sort of harsh, semi-arid, almost desert-like unique sort of part of Canada, where they find all the dinosaur bones. But it's just a very dry, angular, but stunning in its own sort of harsh beauty area where I grew up. I'm always sort of orienting myself back towards that place and then looking at the lushness here in Holland and just thinking about abundance, thinking about bodies situated in landscapes, thinking about bodies that are told they don't belong places. Sediment at Milk River. A house in butter, prairie wind, dirty home on a crooked hill. Nothing like heat off the cracking plain to make you read more closely. I'm looking for a theory of position not being, petroglyphs eroding all over it. A difficulty of bodies, not biologies. Diapsids mouthing a badland moon. Sometimes I think I don't ask the right questions. I'm talking about a slick karst, karmic tumble in limestone bed sheets, bog glass scraping a Swabrose sky, lightning swiping the hoodoo horizon, red cliff raw. Your sentinel claim of stoned gods collapsing. The way she followed you around most of that year, parhelic sundog thing, the way we lacked a hermeneutics. Once molten rock embedding the gills, the coulee runoff stopped with silt. What kind of snake am I lighting out naked like that in switchgrass? Those are all the pieces I have to share today. I'm looking up again at the big sky, big blue sky country, which when I look up feels a lot like home. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the pieces. It's such a stunning lineup today. I'm very excited to hear from the rest of the crew today. I'm very excited to get my hands on Damien's new collection. Blessings, everyone. Be well right now. Bye-bye.
This poem is called Shiny Happy Person. I do not play chess. I grew bored of board games at an early age, as an only child who lived in his head where the fairies were magical and not mould. I was ultra shy as a kid, and tried not to get too tied up in conversations that consisted of ruminations of who I wanted to be. Identity is difficult to determine on a blank canvas with sections already sinking below the surface. We had a cherry blossom tree in the front garden that rained pink petals onto the lawns in late spring. I remember standing under them in a white suit, new holder of the Holy Spirit, and wondering if it would make it any easier and what is the weight of a knot. I'd slay dragons for you. I remember saying that over and over. I'd heard it once in a movie when I was too young to understand how many people I'd say it to and how few would slay even a lame dog in return. I know who I am now. Since those quiet days under the fall of the cherry, when rainy days meant silly games and the coming of the spirit didn't have as much effect on my soul as it did on my wallet. I've tasted more too. Beauty, bounty, boys, bitches, sunsets and saints, gods and clowns, serpents that tasted sweet and a certain kind of cute that gave venomous a new name. I too have found the bitter side of who I can be. Put on a pedestal at a young age and left there to perish at that height, and since then my knees have always trembled at the sight of stairs. I've climbed down since then, and managed to make my way out of the gutter while putting together my own idea of what it takes to embrace the darkness while shining like a fucking star. Our next guest is the youngest poet on this episode today at only 17, but speaks and writes with eternal wisdom. Her debut collection is called Seasons and published by the Hedgehog Poetry Press, and this is her second time on the show. Please go wild for Katie Proctor.
Hi, my name is Katie Proctor and I'm a queer LGBTQ+ poet. I'm really excited to be here on Damien's podcast today to talk about how being queer has affected my relationship with poetry and also to read you one of my poems. So thank you very much, Damien, for having me on your podcast today. I'd first like to talk a little bit about how there is a lot of poetry out there about young love, and I am one of those poets who writes about it. It's a very popular subject matter, but I think there is a lot of heterosexual poetry out there. Heterosexual writers writing about teenage relationships and first experiences with love and romance. And while absolutely I'm sure a lot of young queer kids, including myself, can relate to aspects of those relationships and those poems, there are also experiences that come with being queer and growing up queer and having your first romantic relationships with someone of the same gender that you just can't experience through reading those poems. So as somebody who writes about those themes myself, while I am always writing from genuine personal experience, I think it's really important that there are writers out there who are writing about that kind of thing from a queer perspective, because I know when I was 13 or 14, first getting into poetry and first coming to terms with my own sexuality, there was nothing out there in terms of, kind of young adult queer poetry. So it's always in the back of my mind when I'm writing that it's really important that young queer kids know that they're not alone in these experiences. So that's kind of what my debut book Seasons is about. I'm not going to be reading a poem from that today, but I did want to talk about it quickly because it is a book about love in all forms, and a lot of the poems are very close to my heart. They're about my first relationships and first experiences with queer love, and I think it's really important that that's not erased. Yes, it's a poem. They're poems about love, and anyone can relate to those aspects of those poems, but I also think that being queer is such an important part of my identity, and it has really influenced my poems. So yeah, I think that's my kind of feelings towards the kind of poetry that I write as a queer person and how my sexuality and my experiences with that have influenced what I write. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm now going to read you a poem that I wrote. It's called Coming Out, and I hope you enjoy it. I was 12 when an idea I'd only heard in low-key jokes and primary school whispers on the playground flitted across my neurons, some hidden message that had left itself, taken root somewhere deep behind my eyes, where it waited for me until its petals grew too big to crouch in a corner anymore. I'd like to say it knew me better than I knew myself, grew patiently and peacefully until I could really understand what it meant to start walking in a maze, hemmed in with its hedges, stalking me while I followed the exit signs to nowhere. But it came like a flooded bathroom with taps that wouldn't switch off, forced me under the water, but the air I was trying to breathe was noxious, choking, like a smoking a drug that only gets you high if you were never really here in the first place. And for a second, it was suffocation, silence, buried in the dirt and the cold, building a coffin for a broken body. And I was 12 when my world turned upside down, when I rose up from the rose thorns, became something that was living in me all the time, but I was too scared to see. The world's best kept secret, the walking contradiction cut from a crystal, magic, blood made from rainbows. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you very much again, Damien, for having me on your podcast. Thanks. Bye.
And finally, we have our last guest joining us all the way from Tampa, Florida. She has been featured in Ice Flow Press, Fevers of the Mind, Blackbird Poetry, and many, many more. And you are about to find out why. Please indulge yourself in the flow of Peach Delphine.
When you sleep without pain, light lies dusty in the road, as morning doves summon sunrise, still a spilled candle smoking on the horizon. So many small birds flower in our mouths, a wind of railroad vine, blanket flower rattles cabbage palms. Sky empty as lightning whelks, sun bleached, sands gathered, poured into jars, azure hammered, thin as foil, moon of broken sand dollar, dim, distant. Day gathers momentum. You hold this form as if warmth was a garment shared between us, as if pain was not stitched into your breathing, as if today implies tomorrow, or conch held the sound of sea, always the sea, each wave a text, song unfolded from hands, taking flight, then vanishing. Tide abandons creek, tide abandons mangrove. We stand derelict, waterless, darkness of eyes, darkness of clouds flowing off the gulf. Lamps will not light this place, as cerulean yields to burgundy, as night folds us into velvet. When we sleep, you sometimes hold my hand as to keep me from floating away on a current felt but unseen. Sometimes the simplest touch is all we have, the smallest flower, all the vine can sustain, the smallest word uttered in darkness. Moonflower, full moon, low, rain-heavy clouds, the color of possum, dangle their long tails of lightning, clearing the cabbage palms, disappearing into darkness of gulf. Wind of velvet, wind of eels, so much writhing, laying on of hands. Abomination is the word Granny delivered to the cheek with a kiss. Cutting child, moon in your eyes, salt in your hands, so much emptiness incised, fluid strokes, so much hibiscus flowing, all the shades of burning. Flame is a circular pain, cutting is linear, so much rain, so much river, all into gulf. The flowers of wounds bloom in this season. My hair flows like turtle grass in this tide. Cormorants swim through my longing words. Your hands of pine and cypress pass over me, passed through me. Firmament stretched horizon to horizon. Who can untangle such a skein of scars, a bird's nest of despair? In sleep, you throw one arm out, pulling me close. You breathe my name, such a small word, flowering in moonlight, caressed by sphinx moths. So many shells stacked as markers against the last day of cutting, against the last utterance of abomination. See is not the word for desire. Anguish is what goes in the pot with mirepoix and bay. Jagged is how the dull blade of thunder tears the sky of rain. Despair is not the word for salt. Blood is not the taste of sea. Scar is not the word for sunset. Shards of past better than any stone or upturned bowl for sharpening. Cutting is not the word for knife. Laceration is not the word for suture. Self-inflicted is carved in bone. Here on the creek, iron pot on the fire, skiff pulled up beneath buttonwood, shed roof rusted out, sturdy patch of shade. We burn driftwood to soothe the night as sky sheds azure, opening to all our songs of starlight and smoke. Sea, wind-soused, sleeping in the language of tide, speaking from the inward curl of whelk, reciting all the innermost names still unchosen. You promise to fill the emptiness of my hands. You say this form is the form you have always loved. You say the emptiness of my eyes is the endless fetch of waves from the middle ground. Verdure is the weather of our beginnings. Coral is the accretion of all we endure. Fire is the element we have nourished. We enter the water, we swim as if pelagic. We know the current of longing. We resist the shore, returning with tide. You gather what the gulf has rolled into the stand. We stand facing wind, as if anguish was a flavor never tasted, as if bitter were no more than salt. Words you pour into my hands being drifts of delicate shells, wave-polished strands, sun-glittering, all our horizons water-bound, all our songs smoke, shell and starlight, slow cadence of waves echoing in the mouth of wind, mangrove blazing with birdsong and plumage.
The final poem I'm leaving you with today I don't really think needs an introduction, so I'm just going to read it and hope that we're getting closer to being able to be more open and to stop putting everyone in a box that just suffocates the spirit. We are all individuals worthy of being loved, trying for a moment to catch a spotlight and be seen as extraordinary. You cannot separate everything. We can see paradise. We can see poverty. They live in the same place, paradise and poverty. They are neighbours. They are related. They cannot exist without each other. We can feel happiness. We can feel sadness. They live in the same body, happy and sad. They are connected. They are family. One would not exist without the other. We can touch black. We can touch white. They live in the same skin, black and white. They are not neighbours. They are not family. You cannot separate that which is the same. We can feel straight. We can feel gay. They live on the same street, straight and gay. They are brother. They are sister. They cannot have hope without the other's help. We can hold love. We can hold hate. They shelter in the same heart, love and hate. They feed on our feelings, fester on our fears. We can hate to love, but we should never love to hate. We can hear music. We can hear silence. They live in the same instrument, music and silence. They create harmony. They share equality. You cannot hear the music without respecting the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, men and women, nonconformists and non-believers, gender X and gender equals, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, lovers. Thank you for joining us here on this very special episode of Eat the Storms. I have been Delphine B. Donnelly, and my guests today have been David Hanlon, Katie Proctor, Grace Alice Evans, Peach Delphine, Erin Russell, Anne Walsh Donnelly, Ryan Norman and Andreena Leeanne. For all their details and where to find and support them, or even perhaps buy their collections, check out www.eatthestorms.com and the podcast section. We will, of course, be back again next week, but I will just leave you with the reminder that we each have it within ourselves, the ability to embrace the beauty that shines from each and every person striving to be an individual. It is up to us to shape the future. It is up to us to be open, because we're here, we're queer, and boy, oh boy, we can be bloody poetic. Till next time.